Practicals. Have you ever watched a movie and been like, man, there's a lot of lamps in this? That's because practical lights, like lamps, create great motivation for lighting. Don't worry, I'll turn this off. Recently, I DP'd a short film called Simon Says that was shot in this bar that had a lot of practical lights, and I decided to use those to motivate all of the lighting for the piece. Now, if you watched the film, you probably wouldn't even be able to tell that we used additional lighting because you would think, oh, that light that's in the scene is doing all of the work. But in reality, those are just starting points. So here's what I look for when working with practicals in a space. So the idea is that we zoom out slowly on the cue ball.
Okay.
For the time of sequence, and then he hits it, and he walks around this way. Camera catches him, and he comes around to the other side of the table to get another shot, and that's when he sees April walk in. Right, on you, April. Yep. Practical lights are great at adding motivation. Practicals oftentimes in spaces can't be removed. We were filming in this bar that had a lot of built-in LED lights and neon lights, and we just decided to roll with it and use those as motivation for our lighting. Sometimes you're looking at a scene and you don't know where light is going to come from, or it doesn't make sense for light to come outside. The short I was shooting took place at night, so we couldn't have just a giant light outside blasting in light. Wouldn't really make sense. So there were all these neon signs and all these LED lights all around the space, and a central tube kind of fluorescent light above the pool table where a lot of our conversation takes place. So rather than trying to get rid of all these practicals, take them off the walls, do all those things, I just decided to use them as motivation. You can only fight the lighting that's happening in a space so much, so honestly, using practicals is a great cheat code to just create motivation for your lighting. And that's what we did. There's a scene where they're standing at a bar and there's this super red light that's behind them that ends up keying our main actors as they have a conversation. Now, practically, those are just some LED strips. Those have like barely any luminancy, but you can see them on camera. So I decided just to enhance them. So we put a single RGB light up above, out of frame, blasting our key actors with that red light, seeming as if it was coming from the bar where the LED strips were. Using what was already there to motivate our lighting created a lot of interesting looks and a unique tone for this seduction kind of thriller story. And that's kind of a cool thing too, where the color of the lighting or the stylistic nature of the lighting starts to influence the story and starts to communicate to the audience what is actually going on behind the scenes. Yeah, if we could do like you know, remember that cyan blue that we were doing earlier? Yeah. Let's just do that here. I just want to kiss the back of April. Okay. About another drink for me. Is it? It's cold. Cut. I'm happy with that. All right, that's a cut. The other thing that practical lightings provide is spatial contrast. Basically, depending on where you put your actors, you're able to use different lights as key and hair light. You can move the actors around the space, having them both be keyed and hair lit by the same two lights, moving the actors into positions that make more sense from a lighting perspective rather than bringing in a bunch of lights to try to light every individual shot. There's this typical concept in lighting where you have a hair light and a key light that are doing the same thing for the other person in a conversation. If you've ever lit a podcast or if you ever lit an interview where you have to film two people, you kind of understand this. So the hair light for person one is the key for person two, and the hair light for person two is the key for person one. And honestly, just finding those practical lights throughout the space and blocking accordingly and putting your camera in the right place can create some really interesting looks really, really quickly. That kind of leads into like just the ease of use. You don't have to pretend that there isn't a light in this world. And it just makes it simpler from a production standpoint of just letting the room that would have all of these lights, specifically a dive bar, all of these neon lights, all these overhead lights, all these stringy lights, to just have them there. It makes a lot more sense for the space. It adds a lot more opportunities for that cross lighting we were just talking about. And honestly, it's just easier than trying to pull everything off the walls, hide all the nails, put everything back. Like, it does cut down on setup time. And when you're trying to get 100 shots in a single day, it makes a difference. We didn't do 100 shots, but we did 112 clips. I think ultimately it ended up being like 65 shots in a single day. A lot of that was achieved because of the practicals. And then of course there's just the practicals that inhabit the environment. They just lend to the authenticity of the space. If you're in a living room, you're probably gonna have a lamp. If you're in a kitchen, you're probably gonna have an overhead light. If you're in a dive bar, you're probably gonna have neon signs. Like, there is a certain amount of convincibility that it almost falls into like art department. So practicals are super useful in communicating that the space is what the audience is told it is, and also just being easy to use and creating motivation. A really important thing when you're making a film is what she is doing right here, which is called Greeking, which is where we cover all the labels so nobody sues us.
And for legal reasons, we are under no circumstance trying to say that we own the rights to any of these bottles or their recipes. Thank you. Do not call my lawyers.
Yeah, this is where she needs to be. So, Neil, hold the camera. All right, Neil, can you tilt down a little bit? Like a bar, it's fine. Yeah, cool. All right. Lighting is set. Good thing, John. It was set. Lighting. It's very hard. Now, I'm not saying you need to put a bunch of bare bulbs in the living room and walk around the space with your actor and it's going to look good. It's probably not. There is still a certain amount of curation you have to have between what is keying the actor and how are they moving. So when you're working with practicals, it's very important to communicate to the director where the best lighting opportunities are. Where is the actor going to be the best keyed, and how should we block the scene for the lighting? That's going to speed up the process as well if you have that dialogue with the director. Okay, so you got the practical, great. Now what do you do? So there's 3 different things you can do to the practical light that makes it valuable in the space of the film. Number 1 is bounce. If you're doing that whole cross key thing I was just talking about, you can use a bounce to fill in the actors on their close-ups from the actual practical. You don't have to bring in an entirely different light. The light is already in the scene. You can just use a bounce and wrap it around their face. And ultimately that is going to feel more convincing to the audience anyway than trying to bring in a separate light. Now, if they're not giving off the output that you need, you can bring in a separate light and just match the color temperature. That's what we did for one of the neon signs on our main actress. We just brought in a second light, made it look the same color-wise, and just used that as our key. But we did have to make some quality adjustments to the light to match the neon sign. We actually pulled off the silk and laid in a much, much thinner silk so it would feel a little bit more sourcey, like the neon sign was. So you might have to do that. You might have to augment your modifications. You might have to augment how you're diffusing the light to try to get it to match the quality, the hardness of the practical light in the scene. The other thing is, in that cross-shooting scenario, you can diffuse the hair light a little bit, especially if it's hitting the back of your main actor closest to the camera like it was here. We brought up a pretty thick silk just to kind of diffuse that neon sign so that it wasn't hitting the back of his shirt and taking attention away from the main actress. We still wanted to stay on the shadow side of the light, so we needed to shape it using that to draw attention to her face. Talking to each other while everybody's like leaving, like sound effect. Door closes.
Yeah, and that would really allow them to establish the fact that like they're clearing this bar. Something's about it.
Yes. Yes.
Hey, buddy. Oh my god. Oh my gosh.
How's your mental health?
With just like that. With Joe, it's a lot better. It took a little while to get the first shot off. We had some technical problems and we had to figure out some blocking and whatnot. But ultimately, like the trick is to not get negative. The trick is to not get overly down on a scene or whatever. Like, you want to stay present and focused, and trying to stay positive during all of that is the key to success. 100%. You don't want to get negative. You start getting negative, things start going downhill really quickly. The camera. It's that mirror of that shot we did with Billy where we're tracking. So you could even like Hollywood it just and walk with her down to get like into the ceiling or something. And then the other thing is ignore. Like, just don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. Most practical lights are not bright enough to actually match film related lights. So when you bring in film lights and then start matching your settings to those lights, those practicals are actually going to feel kind of dim. So oftentimes they're just there as on-camera motivation. I know Roger Deakins does this a lot. He'll have a lamp in the scene, but the lamp is not nearly bright enough to actually light the entire scene. So he'll set up what's called a cove light, which is a series of bounces decreasing in intensity as they get closer to the camera, creating a wrap that is motivated by the practical in the scene. A really cool, very useful piece of kit when you're shooting stuff like this is remote controlled color bulbs. If you have those like aperture bulbs or whatever, they are an amazing piece of kit for this type of scenario. You can put the bulb into the lamp that is then going to be able to match the color temperature of the scene, and you're not dependent upon the variance of fluorescent or, you know, incandescent light bulbs for the scene. That can make a massive difference with making all of the lights match and feel like they're in the same world. Oftentimes when you're working on larger productions with a lot of people, the name of the game is simplicity. How can you make this production work in the amount of time that you have? We had about 12 people on set for this one, and, you know, just figuring out ways to make the scene work without having to bring in a lot of extra support, because you have the setup time for the first shot, and then you have the teardown time to reposition the camera, and then you bring in all the support again, and then you have to tear it down and move. That adds a lot of time when you were trying to get as many shots as we were in a single day. The other thing we did was put a tube light in the overhead light fixture thing for the pool table so that we could control the intensity and the color. Those are the type of tools in your tool belt that are just going to make productions go a lot easier. And sometimes you're in a space that doesn't have a light. Like, I remember seeing some behind the scenes of Joker where they're in the bathroom and there isn't really any motivation for light. So they just took some Titan tubes and just smacked them above the mirror like you would have in a bathroom, just a bare fluorescent, and they just turned those on, made them kind of green, and that was their lighting for the scene. Don't be afraid of practicals. Not everything has to be bounced through a window or a streak of light coming through the blinds. You can use practicals to create some really interesting lights, and my favorite thing is when actors move around the space and get different lighting on their face during their performance. Sometimes I feel like lighting can feel very homogenized, like light is always hitting their face from the same direction at the same angle, at the same intensity. And I think sometimes having a practical in that, you know, mix will break things up. You could have your character like stand close to the light where it underlights him when he's saying something mean or something scary. You could have your character like underneath it, far away, like, you know, you can do a lot with practicals, and they don't just have to be motivation. They can actually be really interesting tools for creativity. Thanks for watching. Wait, can I post my YouTube video about this at some point, or do we have to wait until this comes out? Okay, cool.
You said we're gonna be on YouTube?
Yeah. This is it.
We're here at Red's Watering Hole in Gaffney, South Carolina, and we're gonna make it happen. Mike is eating yogurt over my shoulder. This is a fun project that our wonderful director and fantastic leader, Alex Steele, wrote, and we're here to make it happen.
He'll be. Cool.
I didn't think about that,
Yeah.